In ancient Egyptian mythology, cats played a very important role. It is said that long ago, cats ruled over human beings. They were cunning, cruel and very clever. They drove humans as slaves. Eventually dogs came along and they drove the cats away and turned them from rulers to human pets. So the dog was considered by the Egyptians as the most important friend in their lives. And the Egyptians were convinced that cats brought death. My friend sipped his tea and spoke slowly. Is it only Egyptian mythology that involves cats? I looked around. The cute little cat was out fooling around again. Of course not. I'm telling the story of an Oriental cat today. My friend smiled and recounted. It is said that at that time, Buddha said that all those who have 7 orifices in the world can cultivate into immortals. The so-called 7 orifices are actually creatures according to today's words. Right, cats naturally count among them. And according to records, cultivation of the cat every 20 years will be able to grow a tail. When the tail grows to the 9th, it will be able to repair to a certain realm. But this 9th tail is not good to grow. When a cat has 8 tails, it will get a hint that it must go to fulfill a person's wish. And for every wish granted, the cat must disappear, a tail to fulfill it. So it becomes almost a death cycle. But the cat I'm talking about does fulfill this cycle very religiously. So although it has always had 8 tails, it has lived for I don't know how many years, and I don't know how many people it has helped to fulfill their wishes. It also once complained to the Buddha how it could cultivate their way at this rate. Buddha went and laughed without answering. My friend paused for a moment and said mysteriously, actually, the above words I just heard my ancestors talk about it. Because the 8-tailed cat will not just help people, it will only help its first human master's offspring to realize their wishes. In my hometown, the rumor of the 8-tailed cat is very common, and everyone wishes they could meet it. Because if it's willing to help you, you can get any wish, any wish. I looked away, vaguely remembering that he had visited his hometown once before he inherited the estate, and I couldn't help but ask him, could it be that you have met it? Is that why you were able to inherit such an estate? Fool, my parents died a long time ago, and the inheritance was just something I would have accepted once I got to the college graduation, my parents stipulated. My friend laughed out loud. Laughing made me a little embarrassed too. But that time I went back, I did learn something about the 8-tailed cat. My hometown is a place very rich in produce. Of course there are a lot of rats. In order to solve the rat infestation, from a long time ago, every family would raise cats. Strangely enough, none of us in the area had dogs, and we never ate dog meat. The existence of cats gave the local people a great benefit. There was no rat infestation, food was plentiful, and there was no spreading of diseases. So everyone loved cats. And naturally, there are many legends about cats. The first one I know was told to me by my uncle. He passed away last year. At that time, when he recounted this story to me, he was still robust. Although the old man was nearly 80, he had hair and spoke clearly and sharply. Only the eyes are deeply sunken. Fierce look a little scary, because there is a serious cataracts. He and do not want to do surgery, also have to be so. In order to facilitate the narrative, the following is in his tone of voice. Your grandfather, my grandfather and I were only about 10 years old. There was a mountain behind the village. We used to go up the mountain to play, or if we were lucky we could hunt some small animals, knowing that children in the countryside would feed themselves at a very early age. Of course, we knew there were wolves on the mountain, but we usually didn't go far, only on the mountainside. And your grandpa was very good at recognizing wolf territory. He knew those places where you couldn't go, and those places where you could go. In the old days, we also heard the legend of the eight-tailed cat in the village, which was said to have been bred by a teenager in the village hundreds of years ago, and was a very large cat, big enough to be almost as big as an ordinary dog. And the whole body was snow white, and the tail was thick and long. People at that time were in awe of this cat. They thought that this cat might be the cat demon inside the cat. After the death of the teenager, the cat disappeared, and then one after another, people claimed to have seen this cat, and none of the teenager's descendants were prosperous. In the end, they became a famous family in the village. Everyone thought it was the blessing of the cat demon. But the boy's offspring never mentioned it. Because in the taboo, if you tell the story of you and the eight-tailed cat to the next person, will lose their life. But anyway, I've lived long enough, so it doesn't matter if I tell you. Speaking of which, Uncle Grandfather smiled brightly. The weather that day was supposed to be fine, but in June the weather changes within minutes of the tree, and even a good weather watcher like me neglected it. I didn't ask your grandpa to go with me that time, because he was already going to the provincial town to attend school. He can't be as wild as me. So I went alone to pick some mushrooms or hunt some wild game. But before I got to the mountainside, it was raining heavily. I've never seen a rainstorm like that in decades. I had to find a place where the leaves were thicker to hide. The sky was tightly gray and the air was oppressive. I almost forgot it was morning. Just as the rainstorm and the lightning flashed, I vaguely heard the cry of a wolf. At this time of the day, and in the middle of a rainstorm, wolves would never come out to forage for food. But soon a second wolf howl confirmed my suspicions. Before I could walk, I saw 4 wolves surround me. It was not the first time I had seen wolves. I used to go to the mountains with my father to fight wolves. But at that time, I was just following the adults to have some fun. But this time I might really fall into the wolf's belly food. I began to shiver. I couldn't tell if it was from fear or from the rain. The 4 wolves were all adults, and therefore clung together in the rain, which allowed them to show off their size quite thoroughly. I could even count the heels of their ribs, so it looked like they had been starving for a long time. I just held my ground against them, knowing that wolves don't attack you all at once. They will watch carefully, patiently, looking for the best opportunity to guarantee a hit. I didn't know myself that perhaps my throat might be ripped out in the next second. That's when I saw the wolf suddenly flinching, with a low growl coming out of his mouth that I knew was a growl of dread and fear. I looked around. Sure enough, I saw it. It was almost longer than I thought it would be, almost a small lion. But it was covered in snow white, and the rain didn't even seem to touch its beautiful fur. The eyes were like 2 black onyxes, glowing with an unsettling light. And the most striking thing was its tail. It was 8-heeled, and stood spread out behind it like the emperor's dependents on a parade. I suddenly remembered that everyone in the village said that 8-tailed cats usually appeared during unusual rainstorms and would seek out people who needed their wishes granted. The wolf was quickly scared away. The 8-tailed cat also walked faithfully to me. In front of it, I almost forgot that I was a human being, one that was supposed to be above the multitude of creatures. I felt small, but I longed to own it, because it was so beautiful. Speaking of which, Granduncle's eyes were soft, looking ahead, almost lost in the memories of before. It flicked its tail, then shook its head, stretched extremely long, and then looked at me. I knew it was waiting for me to make a request. It turned out that our family was descended from that teenager, which made me excited and thrilled. But again, its sudden arrival left me at a loss for words, and I really hadn't thought about what wish I should ask it to grant me. I asked it carefully, "Can I touch you?" It squinted its eyes without expression, and by this time the rain had stopped. The sun soon came out again. Its white fur actually became translucent in the sunlight. Maybe it said yes. So I touched the fur near its neck with trembling hands. One would have touched many things in one's life, and those that felt good to the touch were silk, satin, glossy porcelain, or a young woman's skin. But the eight-tailed cat's fur felt different to the touch than any fur I'd ever touched. It wasn't messy like ordinary cat fur, or soft like the fox fur we were given. I don't know what kind of feeling it was, but it was very comfortable to touch. It was as if my hands were stuck there. I even wanted to sleep on its fur just like that. But it quickly ducked away. Perhaps it didn't like to get too close to people tired. I knew it was still waiting for my wish, its eight-heeled tail wagging restlessly. I really don't know what wish I want to fulfill, so I said to it that it should come home with me first, and when I think of it, I will tell you. The eight-tailed cat looked at me, and suddenly its whole body glittered, almost shaking me so much that I couldn't open my eyes. Then I saw a cat on the ground. A white cat, not much different from normal fur, and only one tail. I knew it was an eight-tailed, and I was so happy that I picked it up and excitedly headed back towards home. I played with the eight-tailed cat almost every day for the next few days. The adults in the village would not interfere with children playing with cats. Anyway, I didn't want to go to school like your father at that time, and my family was rich, so I just let my nature fool around. But Yatsuo was at first very reluctant to this kind of play. Whenever I threw a ball of paper or wool to it like I did to other cats, it always looked at me with a blank stare. It always looked at me indifferently. It was like an old man looking at a child. I finally realized that teasing it like that was actually disrespectful to it. It barked at me every day, or else it wagged its tail and crouched in the doorway. I know it doesn't want to stay here. It wanted to fulfill my wish of having one less tail as soon as possible, and then repeat that endless practice again. Looking at its back, I felt sorry for it. That day I sat in front of it and asked it, "Is it true that all wishes come true?" It didn't make a sound, just looked at me lazily. "Well, then, my wish is for you to have 9 tails," I said word for word. The eight-tailed cat froze. The black onyx-like eyes were filled with doubt, followed by a look that I later learned was named gratitude. Perhaps it finally understood the Buddha's meaning that it could only have 9 tails if it met a wish made by someone who was willing to make it complete. In the past, people were selfish and thought for themselves. They thought it was only right for the eight-tailed cat to fulfill any wish for them. They would not consider the feelings of the eight-tailed cat, because each tail had to go through decades of cultivation. The eight-tailed cat slowly got up and crouched in front of me, licking my hand. It was warm. I saw that its eyes were a little wet. Perhaps it was tears. Eight-tailed cannot be called eight-tailed. I saw it grew 9 tails. It's so gorgeous and magnificent. Its body flashes white light. So much so that later on, Taidan from the same village kept swearing that he saw my house flashing with a strong white light that day. I watched it go, still a little lost. I know I will never see it again in my life. However, it seems that the future days of the netherworld are sheltered by it. I have nothing to do in my life but to live a happy and peaceful. My children are very filial, my body is very healthy. Perhaps it is all thanks to it, and, yesterday, I dreamed of it, and it said it was coming to fetch me. The above is the account of my uncle's grandfather. At that time I could only believe it after listening to it. I know that there is a kind of disease in medicine which is intended. It occurs mostly in the elderly, who are physically healthy, but their memories are confused. They tend to connect some unrelated things together to form what I call my own memories. I don't know if my uncle and grandfather suffered from this disease. But soon, before I left home, his old man passed away. He passed away very peacefully. He slept in a wicker chair during the day. The family also said that it was called a happy funeral. At the funeral, I was the oldest in my generation. So I was the one who held the first day's service, and what happened that night confirmed my uncle's story. After about 2 o'clock in the morning, most of the people had dispersed, and only a few of the people at the wake were still there, but most of them had already fallen asleep and died. I, however, was surprisingly awake. I was more than a little saddened by the thought that my loved ones, with whom I had been laughing and joking just a few days before, had been separated from me in a flash. But in the stillness of the night, I heard a cat call. It wasn't scary or weird like in the movies, but it was a gentle purr. I also saw the 8-tailed cat. No, I should call it 9-tailed. As described by my uncle and grandfather. Those who see it for the first time will marvel at its beauty. White as snow, but with eyes as black as jade. And the floating 9 white tails are even more magnificent. It walked straight toward me, ignoring my surprise. I wanted to wake up the others, but nothing came out of my mouth. I just watched it walk to my uncle's casket, licked his hand as my uncle did when he left with him, and then disappeared like a puff of smoke. After a long time, I realized I could only speak, but I didn't tell anyone else, knowing that it would invite nothing more than a laugh, and that saying it during such a serious funeral was taboo in our part of the world. It was only after my uncle's funeral that I returned home again, and I never saw the 8-tailed cat again. Its legend seems to have ended as well. What an amazing cat! I couldn't help but exclaim. Indeed, but do you believe it? My friend asked me. Of course, I probably wouldn't believe it if someone else said it, but I'm sure of it, even if you say it's outlandish. I said firmly. That's good. It's not regrettable to die with a confidant in life. It's enough to have you believe. My friend smiled and patted me on the shoulder, signaling me to get an early night. I knew the story was over for tonight. When my friend went out, the room returned to the silence of me alone. At that moment, my friend's cat came back from outside. I looked at the cute cat and thought to myself, could it be the 8-tailed one? If anyone has the chance to see the 8-tailed cat, remember to mention to it to let it have 9 tails, which, because wandering in the human world, they are very lonely and isolated.